Want to get this briefing by email? Here's the sign up. Good morning. Here's what you need to know. Patrick Chapat, Europe is back. That was the message of some of the continent's leaders in speeches at the World Economic Forum that resonated as a rebuttal of President Trump's unilateralism. Above, our cartoonists take on the gathering in Davos, Switzerland. While some at the forum might recoil at Mr. Trump's speech on Friday, many members of the gathered elite appreciate the additional wealth he has stirred to their coffers. Meanwhile, trade deals that do not include the US are moving ahead. Among today's speakers are the leaders of Britain and Israel, and Cyril Ramaphosa, who is widely expected to become South Africa's next president. Pete Maravich for the New York Times. Before he left for Europe, Mr. Trump ended months of speculation by saying that he was willing to speak under oath with Robert Mueller, the special counsel investigating Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Trump also said that he supported allowing immigrants known as Dreamers to morph into citizens over 10 to 12 years. At the same time, his administration is increasing pressure on so-called sanctuary cities. Separately, new campaign filings and news reports suggest that two pro-Trump groups are raising millions, then channeling the money into the Trump Organization and to Trump loyalists. Ludovic Marin Agence France Press. Getty Images. The terrorist cell behind the Barcelona attack that killed 16 people and wounded 140 others in August had an even more deadly plan, according to new research. The group may have targeted the Eiffel Tower in Paris. In Syria, there are concerns that camps holding people suspected of supporting the Islamic State could help extremists spread their ideology. As many as 1,500 of the more than 5,000 Europeans amid its ranks have returned home. Most of the rest are believed to be dead or still fighting. Carlos Osorio, Associated Press. I just signed your death warrant. That was a judge noting that her sentencing of Larry Nassar, the former doctor for the American gymnastics team, would far exceed his lifespan. She added 40 to 175 years for various sex crimes against athletes, on top of 60 years on child pornography charges. We collected some of the powerful statements from the more than 150 victims. Julia Mucci for the New York Times. In Britain, an all-male charity event is shutting down after an undercover investigation by the Financial Times revealed that participants harassed female servers. The ensuing uproar reflected intensifying public anger over issues of harassment. Meanwhile in the US, our cultural critic writes about how Hollywood, Evan Nimble, has absorbed critiques of sexual exploitation and begun converting them into inspirational messaging. And we talked to some women in China, including the student above, who are trying to forge a MeToo movement. They are grappling with a male-dominated culture, censors and officials who accuse them of colluding with foreigners. Researchers in Shanghai have successfully created 2 cloned monkeys. It is the first time that primates have been cloned with a technique that produced Dolly the sheep in 1996 in Scotland. The technique is still a long way from producing human babies, even if that were ethically permissible. Business. Doug Shaker. US startups are trying to rebrand marijuana as a wellness drug to be vatched, eaten, dipped or dabbed. They see great promise in turning it into the drug of the future, our columnist writes. The EU's steep fine against Qualcomm, the chip maker, reflects how Margrethe Vestager, the bloc's antitrust chief, has become the world's most aggressive technology regulator. Strong economic growth is adding to pressure on the European Central Bank to end its stimulus program sooner than it planned. England's loneliest railway station, where a train arrives just once a week, symbolizes the dysfunctions of Britain's transportation network. Here's a snapshot of global markets. In the news, Osman Orsal. Reuters. Simmering tensions between Turkey and the United States over a Turkish offensive against U.S.-backed Kurdish forces in Syria spilled into the open in a phone call between the two countries' presidents. The New York Times. Save the Children. The aid agency suspended all of its operations in Afghanistan after Islamic State militants stormed its office in Jalalabad, killing 5 people. The New York Times. At least 2 people were killed when a commuter train derailed near Milan. Corriere della Sera. In Egypt, the last main challenger dropped out of the coming presidential election, effectively clearing the field for President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to run virtually unopposed. The New York Times. The first trial related to the terrorist attacks on Paris in 2015 opened after concerns that protests by prison guards would block the suspects' transfer to court. Associated Press. The serpent in the Garden of Eden hissed the first fake news to Eve, and it all went downhill from there, Pope Francis wrote in a major document on misinformation. The New York Times in Brazil, an appeals court upheld a corruption conviction against former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, jeopardizing his quest to return to office. The New York Times: a dozen camels were disqualified from a beauty contest in Saudi Arabia because their owners used Botox on their animals' lips. The New York Times: smarter living tips, both new and old, for a more fulfilling life. Melina Hammer for the New York Times: recipe of the day: satisfy a sweet tooth with salted chocolate chunk shortbread cookies. Should you give back the engagement ring? Grief is not a problem to be solved. Noteworthy: the New York Times: in the first part of a new video series, our interpreter columnists explore why some democratic countries like Hungary have been backsliding. In memoriam: Mark E. Smith, the songwriter of the British post-punk band The Fall, 60. Here are a dozen songs from one of the most daunting catalogues in rock. Two former employees of Colette, the path-breaking Paris concept shop, have taken their taste for sneakers and gadgets and some of their customers to a new spot nearby. Australian Open: Caroline Wozniacki reached the final. Here is today's schedule. Backstory: Yoshikazu Tsuno agents France Press, Getty Images. In honor of Australia Day, Friday's holiday marking the anniversary of Britain's arrival down under in 1788, we're looking at one of the country's most recognisable exports. Good day, mate. Australian National University points to an early use of the greeting in The Romance of a Station, a novel from 1889. He pulled up, nodding to Alex, good day, tillage, and replying in a short, morose manner, running his words one into the other, as a bushman does. G day, sir. A century later, the phrase was popularised the world over in a tourism ad campaign featuring Paul Hogan, the Australian actor who would later gain international fame as Crocodile Dundee. Australians have a long tradition of abbreviating and slackening words and phrases, particularly by adding ie to the end. Aussie appears in references from World War I. A book by Gertrude Moberly, recounting the experiences of a nurse, described a farewell dance for the boys going home to Aussie tomorrow. And Australians always have their mates. The nation's unique camaraderie, known as mateship, is especially evident during commemorations of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps or ANZACs, the World War IERA fighting force. Adam Baidowi contributed, reporting, _________. This briefing was prepared for the European morning and is updated online. Browse past briefings here. You can get the briefing to your inbox Monday through Friday. We have 4 global editions, timed for the Americas, Europe, Asia and Australia, and an evening briefing on US weeknights. Check out our full range of free newsletters here. If photographs appear out of order, please download the updated New York Times app from iTunes or Google Play. What would you like to see here? Contact us at europebriefing@nighttimes.com. Follow Patrick Bowler on Twitter at @Merbaupanrui.